Hello and welcome. I am Fahd Husain. Let me begin tonight with today's big development. Iran has submitted a fresh peace proposal to the US through Pakistani mediation team. The details of the proposal are not available at this point, but it is a step in the right direction. So a ceasefire is still in place. But if you look closely at the reporting coming in, particularly from the international media, the situation is being described as a stalemate where, in the words of a report in CNN, the very real possibility of resumption of war looms overhead. That line captures the mood quite accurately, since both sides are engaged in talks but are also preparing for the possibility that those talks may not hold. President Donald Trump's position has been expressed quite directly. He has made it clear that any agreement must include a complete halt to Iran's nuclear ambitions. That kind of statement suggests that the negotiations are not only sensitive but also tightly controlled at the highest political level. On the Iranian side, the tone is equally firm, but it is framed in a different way. The country's supreme leader has said that Iran will safeguard its nuclear and missile capabilities and that these are not matters open to external pressure. In another message, he emphasized that foreign powers have no role in the Persian Gulf, adding that such actors belong in the depths of its waters. When you place these statements alongside the American demands, it becomes clear that both sides are drawing clear lines rather than softening them. While this exchange continues, the situation on the ground is moving in parallel and it is having visible consequences. The US is maintaining and tightening its naval blockade, while Iran is using its geographical position to signal that it can control and halt movement through the Strait of Hormuz. The result is that energy flows have been disrupted enough to move markets quite sharply. Oil prices are now staying above the $110 per barrel level, and the movement has been volatile rather than steady. The impact is already being felt beyond the region, with inflation concerns resurfacing and central banks beginning to sound more cautious again. There is also a legal and political layer to this story that is beginning to come into focus. International media is reporting that the 60-day mark under US war powers legislation has now effectively been reached. This is the point at which the administration would normally need congressional approval to continue military operations. Yet, the current argument coming out of Washington is that the ceasefire has paused active hostilities and therefore changes how that deadline is interpreted. This leaves the situation in something of a legal grey area. What makes this moment interesting is how the overall balance of the conflict is being assessed. A recent editorial in the New York Times put it in very direct terms, saying that tactical success has not yielded victory and that the weaker nation is in the stronger negotiating position. That is a striking observation, especially when you consider the scale of the military imbalance at the start of the war. The editorial goes further to suggest that the US has been highly effective in striking targets but has struggled to translate that into a decisive outcome in an environment where low-cost technologies such as drones and missiles continue to create pressure. In practical terms, what that means is that despite significant military action, Iran retains enough leverage to shape the negotiations. After today's news of the new proposal submitted by Iran, diplomatic engagement is active. However, public positions are becoming more rigid rather than more flexible. Economic pressure is increasing, but it has not yet forced a breakthrough. And the military dimension, while still significant, has not settled the issue. That combination tends to produce a very specific kind of phase in conflicts. One where the situation appears stable on the surface, but is actually quite fragile underneath. The absence of large-scale escalation can create a sense of pause. Yet the underlying tension continues to build, and the margin for error becomes smaller over time. So the question tonight is very simple. Will we see the war resume, or will there be a miraculous diplomatic breakthrough. That is where things stand today. To discuss this situation in detail, we are joined now by Mr. Borzul Daragahi. He's a long-time foreign correspondent. He's a veteran of the Financial Times, Los Angeles Times, The Independent, and BuzzFeed News. He was a 2005 Pulitzer Prize finalist for his coverage of Iraq and led the bureau that was named a 2007 Pulitzer finalist for its Iraq coverage. He was also named a 2010 Pulitzer finalist for his coverage of the 2009 election unrest in Iran. He has covered Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and the wider Middle East, and he joins us today from London. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, given your vast experience reporting in this region, I want to start with asking you to give your reaction to this news which has just recently come, where it's come from the Iranian official news agency. And it says that a fresh proposal, the Islamic Republic of Iran delivered the text of its latest negotiating proposal to Pakistan as the mediator in talks with the US on Thursday evening. This was reported by the official IRNA news agency. What should we read into this?
Well, I think it's a positive news in a way. It shows that Iran is still engaged seriously in these negotiations. But to be fair, it's been kind of serious from the very beginning, and it's made its red lines very clear. And those include no discussions about our ballistic missile program, no discussion about our proxy groups, but we can talk a little bit about the nuclear program so long as the United States respects Iran's right to enrich on its own soil. So those red lines have been clear. What the latest ideas from Iran that have been coming out have been about the Strait of Hormuz. And what the Iranians have been saying lately is that why don't we put all those other issues aside and let's just talk about the Strait of Hormuz. This is kind of smart in that it puts Donald Trump in a tough position, in that the starting point of the negotiations is something that happened because of the war that he started. So it kind of creates a whole new balance of power between the two countries.
But we are seeing a lot of belligerence from Donald Trump. He continues to talk tough and he continues to post very provocative things against Iran. And he's also now been briefed about the option of restarting hostilities if that is required. So, in your opinion, what are you reading? Is there a serious danger of the US once again resorting to armed conflict?
Oh, absolutely. I think at this point, the possibility of renewed armed conflict is more likely than less likely. I would put it at around 60%, just because all of that equipment is there. The United States, as you mentioned, under Donald Trump, is full of belligerent language. Eventually, he's going to have to follow through on some of that, or risk being called out by his own base. Those messages, that nasty talk Donald Trump is putting out, is aimed mostly at his own supporters. He's trying to feed them red meat. His support base is dwindling. He's alienated so many different people. He only has a very small base of strident supporters right now, and this is the kind of material they like. Unfortunately, it's really the opposite of the Iranian negotiating style. They're kind of formal and old-fashioned, and they see these threats as threats. And that's really, to the Iranians, one of their main principles is we don't negotiate under pressure.
So then if actually Donald Trump decides to go back to war, how would that be different? So, for example, we can assume that if he starts bombing Iran again, Iran is going to start lobbing missiles back towards the US bases or Gulf countries. There's going to be, of course, renewed fighting on all fronts. And with fresh bombing, what new outcome could actually take place? I mean, the Iranians are not going to open the Strait of Hormuz just because more bombs are falling. So how does another round of fighting help Donald Trump?
I don't know if it helps Donald Trump. It helps him, as I said, feed more red meat to those supporters. Look, Fahd, there's a reason why the war stopped in the first round. When it stopped, it was because the escalation in the conflict was about to go way up. If you recall, if viewers recall, Donald Trump was threatening to send Iran back into the Stone Age and destroy all of Iran's energy infrastructure. And Iran, in turn, was saying that if the United States did that, they would destroy the Saudi, UAE, Qatari energy infrastructure, target desalination plants in the Gulf, and target infrastructure, critical infrastructure in Israel. And so it stopped at that point. And because it was about to get really, really, really grim and really dangerous. And now we're at a point where if the war resumes, it's going to get much worse. If you look at the history of all wars, that were stop and start, et cetera, World War I, World War II, it always got worse and worse as it went along.
But this war can't go on for too long. I mean, every analyst, from both sides of the conflict is saying that there is no way that this can continue for, as long as the other major conflicts took place. Not just because, the impact is so huge, both in terms of the damage to regional countries, but also to the economy of the entire globe. And plus on top of that, even papers like the New York Times are now writing in their editorials that the American military is failing to dominate Iran's resistance. So whichever way you look at it, even in terms of the military equipment that the Americans have, which is depleting. So whichever way you look at it, it looks very difficult for the Americans to just make this into another forever war.
Oh, I think that it could very well go on for a long time. Wars tend to reshape planets. They reshape supply lines. They reshape continents. And if you look at the situation right now, it looks like the war is not possible to continue. But when you have a country like Iran, for example, or the US, they can reconfigure factories. They can go to partners. They can go to Russia, China. They can go to Europe. They can go to different people and different countries, different financiers. So, when you're in a state of war like we are now, things are very kinetic. They move very rapidly, and countries will readjust. And you know what? Even the victims of the war, i.e., for example, people in Pakistan and India and Southeast Asia, Latin America, they will have to readjust. They will have to find other ways of getting energy. Maybe it will hasten the adoption of clean energy, battery and solar and so on. So I think that it's really analytically irresponsible to look at the supplies of missiles that Iran has and the supplies of missiles that the US has and say, oh, this war can't go on forever. It indeed can.
The general perception is that between the US and Iran, both are trying to make sure that the other side blinks first. And of course, then the other layer of analysis that we read is that Iran can hold on for X number of months in the current context, their economy can hold on for so long. On the American side, there's so many weeks or so many months before the American economy or the political impact of the war is going to start getting too much. So when we are talking about who has more stamina, is that an important factor right now in trying to figure out where this conflict will ultimately go?
Well, absolutely. It's important. It's crucial, actually, because to Iran, this is an existential battle. The U.S. and Israel immediately launched this war and said that this was about regime change. We're going to topple the clerical regime in Iran. We're going to go after the Revolutionary Guard. We're going to start targeting checkpoints manned by 16-year-old kids in the cities and so on. And so this basically became an existential conflict. They hit energy plants, they hit schools, if viewers recall. And so to the Iranians, the message is this: we have to keep going no matter what. It doesn't matter how much we can't eat. It doesn't matter if our jobs are gone. We have to fight. Whereas for the Americans, this was 100% a war of choice. There was no threat to the United States. There was no even imminent threat to Israel. This was a decision taken on the high of the Venezuela operation, with Netanyahu fulfilling his career-long dream, keeping himself also out of jail in the meantime by maintaining a sense of crisis in Israel. So, the stakes are very different for the two different sides.
But which side has more stamina, you think, right now?
Oh, absolutely, Iran, because they are facing the fight of their lives. The Islamic Republic is going to be destroyed if they don't fight. Iran's, at least in the minds of people in Iran, Iran's national infrastructure, including steel factories, petrochemical plants, places that people have been working on and building for decades, is going to be destroyed if they don't fight back. So, absolutely, Iran, on the issue of stamina and willingness to fight, I think it favors Iran.
So while a suspense continues to haunt us about whether we are heading towards peace or there could be a fresh round of hostilities, there is also renewed focus on how this war is being reported. When talks were held in Pakistan about a couple of weeks back, there was a blanket coverage from here because the media from all over the world had descended onto Islamabad. And of course, Pakistani media was also covering it very comprehensively. But since then, there has been a muted debate about the kind of reporting that we have done here in Pakistani media. Has it really added value to the overall coverage of this conflict? Our analysis, views, writings, television shows, all of these in the larger scheme of things, where this is the single most biggest story that we've covered for a very long time, and the fact that there is a war happening right next doors, and the fact that Pakistan is playing such a key role. So keeping in mind all of these things, has the Pakistani media actually done justice to this story? I want to do a deep dive into this with three of my colleagues who've of course been doing exactly this, trying to make sure that we do good high quality coverage. But have we succeeded? Well, let's ask the three of them. Zarar Khoro is my first guest. He does his wonderful show on Dawn News. Mr. Rahman Azhar is my colleague here at Express. He's been doing a fantastic show on Express News for many years. And Anika Nisar, also my colleague, who does her own very good show on ARY News. So Zarar, let me just start with you. Are you content? Are you satisfied with the way that the Pakistani media has covered this story and continues to do so?
I am not dissatisfied. I mean, I know that that might be a contrary opinion at this point in time. But also, when we talk about the coverage, I think we need to separate it into at least two parts. One is the coverage on the mediation process that Pakistan was engaged in. Call it facilitation, call it mediation. That's up to you. And also the general coverage of the war and all the related and connected issues thereof, right? And in particular, the possible impact on Pakistan, what scenarios we're looking at. So if we start out with the mediation process, now I know that as media persons, I mean, we really just need the next breaking news. We need the next story. We need the next leak. Now, wherever those leaks going to come from, like traditionally, those leaks come from government sources, come from security agency sources, come from military sources, right? And in this particular case, those would be the only sources that could possibly feed you information. And as we all know, they were running an incredibly tight ship this time round. And I think it's a tighter ship than I've ever seen. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Because, I mean, there are no real precedents for any of this. But in general, we know that the state is fairly leaky, right? In the sense that some kind of news filters down to us and so on and so forth. And then, sometimes we are told to run it unattributed. And so on like that. But here's the problem here, is that this time no information was being delivered to us at all. Now, as media persons, obviously, that's kind of the kiss of death for us, right? But if we take into account, if we look beyond our own, say, admittedly narrow self-interest, and we look at what was at stake here, Pakistan was not a party to this war, in the sense that the belligerent parties are America and Israel and Iran, right? And two of those parties were in Pakistan. And as it was fairly unprecedented that something like this would happen in the first place. But then when you've got these guys here, and all of a sudden leaks start coming from the Pakistani side, what does that do to your credibility as a mediator? I think that would be the kiss of death for it.
Now,
Now, as far as the overall coverage of the war, I mean, I would consider it satisfactory.
okay, let me get to bring forth another angle to this. Anika,
Sure.
in many ways I agree with Zarar that at the time that the talks were going on here and Pakistan of course was the mediator, it was a sensitive time for us, and any leaks or any kind of information coming out from Pakistani officials could have been interpreted in a different manner. But those talks are done, and now we are at a stage where there is literally a no war, no peace kind of a situation, and stories that are coming out are almost all of them based on unnamed sources. You know, whether we are talking American media or British media or of course even Israeli media. But here we still remain the only mediator. And even today, there is talk of, perhaps another proposal coming from Iran and going through Pakistan to the US. But there is hardly any, groundbreaking or exclusive or value-added reporting or information coming out of Pakistan. And we have to bank on, publications like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times or CNN to try and figure out actually what's happening. So is that a failure? Should we have done better than that?
Firstly, thank you for having me in the show. Secondly, we are at a different situation right now. If you remember in 2025, just this month of last year, we had ample information coming in when we were the party in the war. I'm talking about Pakistan-India war, Marka-e-Haq. And we had ample information. We had information coming to us every second from all sorts of sources, government sources, military sources, and even on-ground sources of our own that each journalist has for themselves, the network that they create. So at that time, since we were the party, we had the information, we could disseminate the information very easily. This time there's a contrast. We are, and I would agree with Zarar over here, that we are at a different level right now. We are the mediator. We need to seem neutral. We need to act neutral, and our media needs to act neutral as well. So that being said, when it comes to the media of USA and when it comes to the media of Iran, they have ample information coming in because each party has to satisfy their own domestic audience as well. But this time, we don't have to satisfy our domestic audience. Our domestic audience is happy that after all those years of terrorism, after all those years of problem and turmoil, Pakistan has emerged as a global stabilizing power or global stabilizing factor amongst two nations that are both on the extreme sides of the opposite spectrum. So when it comes to news being leaked to the US media, or when it comes to the news being given to the Iranian media, that makes complete sense because obviously USA would try to make it seem like, and some in Trump administration are deeming this war to be over just to satisfy their Congress and not to get the Congress approval. So news leakage over there and pilferage over there makes sense because they have to satify their Congress, they have to satisfy their domestic audience, and so does Iran.
It's a neutrality factor, Rahman, which again, both the guests have actually talked about that, and the fact that because we are mediating, then we should be extra careful. But the fact is that, again, Rahman, I mean, if you're talking about American officials leaking to their government and Iranian officials leaking to their media and Iranian officials leaking to their news platforms, then it's almost like we are passive recipients of leaks. And that puts us journalists in a very helpless kind of a situation that we are so dependent on official leaks that if they are generous enough to throw some scraps of information at us, then suddenly we become professional journalists. But if they are not, then we've got nothing to do. To me, that sounds a bit. I think journalists need to do better than just be so completely dependent or at the mercy of leaks coming from officials.
Right. Thank you so much, Fahd Saab, for having me on the show. I think there is another angle to that as well. And as you know, Pakistani media has been mostly very inward looking. We haven't reported much on international stories developing even in the region as well. None of the Pakistani channels or news outlets, they have any bureaus in other countries, let's say, they've been reporting mostly on the internal politics as well. So it's very inward looking. So I think there is also one of those factors where the media and media's approach also comes into play as well. But I think to start with this conflict, there were sensitivities involved on both sides. Iran on one side is a Muslim brotherly country, and US with whom we recently had a thaw in relationship, and was seen very positively as well. So I think there was a problem in reporting from one angle or reporting from one side, and it could have been, like Zarar and Anika rightly pointed out, that it could have been taken as a state position. So in many countries, even in Western countries, as you know, the media is sort of also at times the extended arm of foreign policy as well. So I think they have both rightly pointed out that any leak or any position taken by Pakistani media could have been interpreted as the position of a Pakistani state or a leak coming from the Pakistani side. But I know some of the excellent journalists, even for local media as well, who have been extensively reporting and who've been bringing out stories, and also for international media outlets that are based in Pakistan. But I think there needs to be a soul searching even for Pakistani journalists or Pakistani media as well. That how have we looked at this conflict, and have we reported enough? Our muted position on most of these issues, whether it can be interpreted as a neutrality.
Let me add something to this. I think Zarar, let's be honest. We're all colleagues, so we can be honest with each other. I'm very uncomfortable, Zarar. I'm very uncomfortable with this logic of us being, because we are neutral, therefore we should not be reporting. It's been 2-3 weeks. It's still the biggest story. And I'll tell you, I don't know whether you share the same experience. We've worked for newspapers. We still work for newspapers, and we can't start our morning without reading a newspaper. I mean, that's how my life has been, and I'm sure all of our lives have been like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the fact is that maybe some years ago, I would spend about an hour and a half reading Pakistani newspapers. Now I'm done in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I spend more time reading international newspapers. And I think that is something that really hurts me. Why do I spend only 10 minutes or 15 minutes reading our newspapers? Because I don't find anything which adds value to my information. And that's my point. If we are not giving value-added information in the name of neutrality, we are depriving our readers, our people, our audience of content that they deserve.
Well, I mean, look, Fahad, I mean, again, I'm going to return to my original point. I mean, again, here we are discussing two different scopes of coverage, right? One is, okay, so what did Iran really say? What did J.D. Vance really say? And so on and so forth. That is that the lack of that information may frustrate me, but I do understand it. And look, you like you said correctly, we're dependent on leaks. But believe me, this time round, I had serving military officers calling me and asking me, "Yeah, can you tell me what's happening?" It was kept so tight that within the military itself, no one knew what was being discussed. And I will again stress that is important. I'll give a small example. Suppose Anika and Rahman have gone to war. Okay, they're shooting at each other, and Fahad is like, "Okay, come to my house and we can discuss this in absolute confidence." And then Fahad, the moment the meeting is over, he starts sending me WhatsApp messages, and I start spreading them around. What does that do to Fahad's credibility, right? Now, as far as what you said about value addition, well, I would argue that there are many kinds of value addition, right? I agree wholeheartedly with what Rahman just said. Our media is inward looking. I mean, speaking personally for myself, I find local politics incredibly boring. So, and you would know this, we've had this conversation many times. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to talk about, what the future of the PTI is. It's been done to that. So my focus has always largely been international. So I found myself actually in a very good place during, I mean, it sounds terrible, I know, but then, I mean, you know how we are in this field, right? So I found myself in a very good place when this war happened, because there's so much you can talk about. You can talk about the munitions that are being used. You can talk about the importance of Hormuz. You can talk. I mean, why not tell people about the history of Iran itself?
Exactly.
Mossadegh, Shah, I mean, then this is the background information, and this is where we have to apply our mind,
And
right? I
and
mean,
that's where we
not
are
bullying.
falling short. That's where we are
Well,
falling
that's where
short.
most of us are falling short. But again, I mean, where some fall short, then some move forward. I mean, you've been interviewing some fantastic people. You haven't fallen short. I would like to think that I haven't fallen short. I probably have.
But
But I mean,
fair enough.
it's one of those things,
But very
one of
quickly,
those lives
okay,
that myself, right?
okay,
That we
very
need to
quickly, I
talk.
need to,
I'm going to just add one more thing here. Sorry,
very
very
quickly.
brief. When we talk about international media, right? I mean, again, we have to understand that even the American media is in many ways an adjunct of the state now. And in Iran, even in Iran, you see that the Tasneem news agency,
Yeah,
which is very close
agreed.
to IRGC, has a very different line.
Fair
So
enough. But
even in that, there are clues, right? Gee,
But
sorry.
I want to, Anika, I want to, I'm arguing something different. And just give me very briefly, because I have to wrap it up. The fact is, what Zarar said, I think that's the important thing. I'm not saying we start divulging state secrets. I'm not saying we start reporting on information that could actually impact the negotiations. But there is so much more value-added content that needs to be produced, which
Absolutely.
does not compromise Pakistan's mediation. But we are unable to do that, either because we lack professional capacity or imagination. I don't know what the problem is. Well, I have some ideas, but that is the problem that I'm referring to, that we can still do so much which we are not doing.
Here our myopia paralyzed us. Basically, we were so focused on what was happening and we need to get the news out of what was happening. And when we were unable to get that out, we got frustrated. A lot of our colleagues got extremely frustrated that why is the news not coming out? We are right across Serena in Jinnah Convention Center. It's not even a kilometer away, and we can't get the news. That was so frustrating for so many of our colleagues or so many of the journalists that they got myopic instead of looking at the bigger
That was one
picture.
event, Anika, that is done. But since then, the last 2-3
I'm
weeks,
coming to that.
we haven't done
I'm
anything.
coming to that. I'm coming to that. So we, instead of seeing what the impact is globally of this war, instead of seeing what the impact would be in the larger context, instead of seeing that how the Islamic Revolution was actually a result of US supporting a revolution in itself in Iran and the Iran-Iraq
Yep.
war that happened, we completely forgot about that. What happened in 1953, what happened in the 70s in Iran, what happened with Iraq and Iran, that we thought that the he says, she says politics, that is usually domestic politics, we're going to apply the same thing in the international domain. It doesn't work like that. We have to have a broader picture. And I think this is a point of reflection that we need to have. That when it comes to covering events that are as huge as this, we need to stop focusing on what he says or she says or what US says or what Iran says, and we need to see the history. And from that history, we need to extrapolate to what could happen in the future.
Yes,
So I agree with that.
and also, Rahman, finally,
I'm giving you a standing ovation right now,
No,
Anika.
no.
You can't see me, but
But let me give you the other point of view. Then
Brilliantly
the
said.
fact is, Rahman, that yes, we need to know, if you're reporting on international conflict, we need to know the history, the US policies, Iran, what it has done in the region, etc., etc. But this story is also a domestic story. It is impacting Pakistan. It is influencing everything that we do, and the fact that with such a deep influence on Pakistan, even that is not being reported well. Even we're not even reporting Pakistan well.
Right, because besides US and Iran, I think the mediator was the talk of the town, and that was Pakistan, and everybody was surprised why and how Pakistan developed itself as a mediator. And you're right, there were not enough stories also presenting Pakistani point of view as far as these talks are concerned. I mean, I'm not saying that Pakistani point of view should be or could have been, handing out whatever happened or leaking the information from the boardroom, but it could have been a Pakistani perspective, how Pakistan approaches these talks and what Pakistan wants out of these talks. But I think, Fasab, the fundamental question is about our media houses. and not about journalists actually, I would say. Whether our media houses and news outlets are actually willing to invest and develop such infrastructure or resources that could handle a story like that. You know, it was the scale of the story was quite big. We have seen outlets like CNN, BBC have handled that in a much
this
better
is
way.
part of the soul searching
I'm going to
process.
disagree a little bit, if you allow me.
Just-
It's a question of resources. Yes, it's a question of capacity, but it's also a question of imagination.
I was about to say that. Thank you for mentioning that.
I mean, I don't need to physically be in Tehran to be able to do this now, right? I don't need to have someone sitting in CENTCOM feeding me information. There is so much that can be covered, and there is
All
so
right.
many angles.
That's an important point.
All it really requires
absolutely.
is some imagination, some basic knowledge of history,
And
at least knowing what the
imagination
last
doesn't
century
cost too much
was
money.
like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, all three of my colleagues, for what in fact is part of this process that Rahman was. Who couldn't find the Strait of Hormuz on a map are gravitating towards this stuff because it's funny, it's self-aware, and it's a total vibe shift. Iran realized that if you want to win a war in 2026, you don't start with a lecture, you start with a meme. So here we are. Let's try and find out how all this has happened and what lessons can be drawn. And to discuss this, I'm joined by two very valuable, very well-known and very qualified guests to speak on this. My Asad Beg is my first guest. He's a writer, journalist, media strategist. He's also the founder and executive director of Media Matters for Democracy, and also writes a very widely read column in Dawn newspaper. Ali Aftab Saeed is my other guest. He's a TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and a journalist with a long experience. Thank you both for joining us. Ali, in fact, let me just start with you. I'm sure you've seen these Lego videos, and it wasn't something that we expected to be coming out of Iran in this conflict. What kind of an impact do you think it's having?
It has had a great impact up till now, and we saw this whole meme game that we won square and fair when we had this skirmish or war with India, and now Iran is very effectively portraying his narrative through all this. But again, you see, it has now become easier for countries or for people to do this because of AI. You see, it used to be very difficult making songs, making AI, making Lego videos, making animations, making so memes. But now with AI, you can do it with a few prompts, and so more people will try to do this. More successful, they'll be at it. So if like 300,000 people are making such videos, you'll bound to get like 30 good ones.
Absolutely.
So this is very effective.
And in fact, Asad, what really surprised me and probably everybody else was that, you know, if this was a war between Iran and some other country, one could have in some ways expected that Iran would do well, but it's a war with the US. I mean, US is a country that actually started this whole concept of soft power and media and narrative building, and they are on the defensive.
I think, Fahd, to be honest with you, I was not ready for this kind of information that is coming out, which is entertainment, infotainment, all of that combined in just one package, which is scary, as you rightly pointed out, and also funny at the same time, right? I was not prepared for that. And frankly, yes, you're absolutely right. US really has been at the forefront when it comes to the information warfare. I mean, look at, for instance, what Trump did in his campaign, right? Trump focused completely on the podcast as opposed to the mainstream media. And this time around, frankly speaking, I was surprised. Not only that, but the kind of information that they were putting out, the mediums that they were putting out through, right? So they were kindly focusing on, very narrowly focusing on Gen Z impact. Also, Fahd, there is one more thing that I don't know if this is a forum to talk about it, but one thing that I'm really kind of thinking about is that why hasn't our media, the mainstream media, evolved like that when it comes to information distribution, right? Talking about stories, for instance. Why can't we think of any other innovative ways of kind of transporting information like the Iran is doing, for instance, right? Brilliantly done job. That's all I can say.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. In fact, in this program, I had a discussion with some of my colleagues from the media, and my argument is that we should have done far better than what we have, given the fact that we are key players in all of this. But unfortunately, we have not been able to produce value-added content. And I was just telling my colleagues that I now spend less time reading Pakistani media and much more time consuming content from foreign platforms, because I find much more higher quality, more information-based reporting from there. So Ali, that is a problem here. But I think, as you very correctly said, that when it came to meme wars, we were far ahead of India. Again, at two countries where Indian soft power is well known, and there's no doubt about the power of their Bollywood and etc. But when it came to humor, we beat them hands down and continue to do so.
Yeah, so we will always do that because we as a nation, we are good at making fun of ourselves as well. So India has recently started taking themselves too seriously.
Exactly.
And yeah, this will always go against them. Secondly, the thing is that like in this instance, we see that Iran is dominating US in this whole narrative or memes or these Lego videos thing. It's because people general public is doing this. Had US gave this assignment to Hollywood to do it, then probably they might have done something, but regular people in US are not interested in this. They're the aggressors. There is no point in them being active on media and doing propaganda for the US. Whereas in Iran, people want to participate in this because they've been attacked.
Yeah.
So whoever can fight is fighting, whoever can't is doing this.
That's an excellent point. And we were speaking about India, Asad, and you've written an excellent column today in which you've argued that there's an outrage industry in India and on the media is in many ways much more destructive than constructive. The impact that they're having is negative. So what is your reading? What is wrong with this Indian media, and don't they realize the damage it is doing to their image?
No, I think Fahd, they do realize the damage that they've been doing to themselves, but also they don't care about that. That's what my reading is, and this is something we've been speaking about for a while now. Remember, we've had this conversation many times over, specifically about the hate on social media platforms and so on. But the point is that they've come to the stage, the Indian media specifically, where we have created what we call a perfect storm, right? And that perfect storm is basically a means for them to get profit every single time there is a conflict in the region, whether it relates to them, whether it doesn't relate to them, and so on and so forth. And by the way, this model that I was talking about in my article, this is being replicated by many other countries, including our, Pakistan. It was replicated, a while ago when there was a certain political party in power in Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So this is sadly their moment of earning profit. And one thing that we don't really talk about is that this kind of hate we talk about, that the Indian media is brewing hate and Indian media is talking about this and that. What we don't understand is that this is actually their way of making profit and their way of cashing upon the hate that they've created within the public. And it prompted me to write this article. In general, I was very surprised of why they're doing it, because obviously this kind of peace building will affect India if anybody else in the region, right? And I generally went to their Twitter space and I genuinely found random people who were pissed off about Pakistan's involvement in the peace process. And I started wondering, why are they doing it? And this cycle essentially is something that they're building on, right? So Indian media is specifically profiting from that. Do not think about that they're getting emotional in the process. Do not think about that they want a certain kind of narrative. The only thing that they're after is profit, and they're minting millions out from the conflict and so on. But at the same time, they're hurting their own people, like I mentioned in the article as well, the kind of violence and hate that we see brewing on, on ground in India.
So thank you both for joining us and sharing your views with us. That brings us to the end of our show. That's the full frame for tonight. See you Monday.